Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The 21st of August is for a day of introspection for our founder, the inspiration behind this great institution, Jamshed Bhabha. We tried to find subjects which might have intrigued him, and this evening's talk with a rather unusual subject would have pleased him, I think. And so who better than Rohinton Nariman to speak to us with his uncanny analytical slant on this very interesting comparison. His encyclopedic knowledge not only of law, of historic constitutions of countries and myriad other subjects, ranging from comparative religion to history, travel, is often quite astounding. But his great love and understanding of music is unique. One of the joys of going to the hill station Mahabaleshwar during Christmas week for many years was looking forward to meeting Rohinton after his evening walk, when he would saunter across to the bungalow and settle down for a drink before he went back to his home in the Mahabaleshwar Club. This precious 1 hour, or sometimes stretching longer, was in itself an education on many subjects, and particularly religion and the effect it had on humanity, civilization, history, and of course, as you now know, politics. This was all so encompassing and interesting that even much younger persons than ourselves would sit entranced and educated as if in the presence of a master professor. And it was all lucidly clear. In short, he was and is a formidable intellect. His knowledge of music is vast, from opera to chamber music to performances which are unusual. In short, he was and is admirable. Therefore, I'm sure that the rather intriguing subject that he has chosen will draw a huge crowd because of its esoteric nature. I'm sure we will all emerge so much wiser than before the beginning of this evening. May I please introduce Rohinton Nariman. Thank you, Bhushan. Thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Intriguing the subject is indeed. When Khushru asked me to speak, I suggested that I speak on music. He suggested that I speak on law, so I had to have some kind of via media. Now, why I chose this was it suddenly came upon me almost in a flash that you have such fabulous epics. You have the Mahabharata, which is perhaps the greatest ever epic written. And at the same time, you have the music drama, Wagner's music drama, which is nothing but an epic, a huge epic in music. Now, would it be possible somehow or the other to speak about both? I was very intrigued, and when I went back to both, I suddenly discovered that yes, it is, and that there are real parallels between the two, even though Wagner had nothing whatsoever to do with the Mahabharata. So I sat down and I chalked out for myself what I thought were broad parallels, etc. When I also found that there were very real parallels in the Ring and in the Mahabharata. What I have done for you is also a little intriguing. I have given you a synopsis of both so that you come prepared for this speech. There are lots of names which will be thrown at you. And some of them are up, as you can see. To begin at the beginning, the Mahabharata is really a work of somebody called Ved Vyas. Now, Ved Vyas is really an appellation, it's a title. His actual name was Krishna Dvaipanya. And Ved Vyas really means a person who compiled the Veds, put them all together. He composed the kernel of the entire work, which was about 8,800 verses. So at its first rendition to his own son, some 8,800 verses were spoken. Post this, we come to the Mahabharata War, the aftermath, the Pandavas going to heaven, Parikshit, that is the grandson of Arjun, taking over. Now, when Parikshit's son, Jamshed, has a reading done, this now becomes 24,000 verses from 8,800 verses. The original work was called Jaya. It was not called Mahabharata at all. Jaya meaning victory. The second rendition changed the name of Jaya to Bharat because it now spoke of a King Bharat who was one of the old-time heroes. And a third rendition after the Bhrigu priests took over this entire thing, now embellished the Mahabharata into 100,000 odd verses, which is the version we have today. So you have plot, subplot, sub-subplot, etc. And it makes things a little complicated. Now, Wagner's Ring was another fantastic, unbelievable composition. It took him some 26 years intermittently, 14 actual years because there was a break in between for some 12 years. And unlike other opera composers, he insisted on reading up and writing the libretto himself. So he wrote the libretto backwards. He started from the fourth opera, which is Götterdämmerung, went backwards into Siegfried, then backwards into Valkyrie, and finally the prologue opera, Rheingold. The composition, however, was done the other way around. And the composition and this libretto writing took from 1848 to about 12 years. And then there was suddenly a break at Siegfried Act 2. So you've reached the third music drama, and at Act 2, there was a complete break. For 12 years. Thank God this break happened, because as a result of his love for Mathilde Wesendonck, a married lady, he produced two other masterpieces, Tristan and Isolde and Die Meistersinger. And after 12 years, continued with the Ring. And finally wound up in 1874. That is 26 years after he started in 1848. This 15 or 16-hour work is unbelievable. And it had his first rendition on my birthday, 13th August, of course, in 1876. And it has never looked back ever since. It's been one of the most popular, and most brilliant music dramas ever written. So with this brief introduction, we come now immediately to the parallels. What are the parallels that one can find between the great epic Mahabharata and these music dramas? The first thing of note that occurred to me was that you have Ved Vyas, who is the compiler, writer, etc., of the Mahabharata, and Wotan, another central figure of the Ring, who happens to be the king of the gods. Both of them had grandsons, give me a glass please, had grandsons who were fatally murdered through stratagem. And of course, one grandson was Duryodhan, and how he was a grandson, I'll tell you in a minute. And Wotan's grandson, Siegfried, who is the hero of the entire four operas. Now, I told you Ved Vyas was the compiler. How come he became a grandfather? Originally, you had a king called Shantanu. Now, Shantanu produced Bhishma, about which I'll speak a little later. And having produced him, then married a lady called Satyavati. Satyavati was the daughter of some king of the fishermen. And from Satyavati, he produced two sons. Mind you, Satyavati had already produced Ved Vyas himself through a sage called Parashar. So therefore, these were two half-brothers. These two half-brothers, in turn, didn't produce anybody, because the first Chitrangad got killed by a Gandharva. A Gandharva is a celestial being who's associated with music. And the second, Vichitravirya, got married to two princesses from Kosi, Ambika and Ambalika. Now, despite the fact that he got married to the two of them, he died young and he didn't produce any children. So Mother Satyavati calls upon her eldest son, who is Ved Vyas, to go in and now produce children. And he does exactly that. So he goes into Ambika's bedchamber, and Ambika gets shocked seeing him. So because Ambika is shocked, and Ambika, averts her eyes, the son Dhritarashtra is born blind. Pandu, in turn, who's the other son, is born from Ambalika. And Ambalika also gets a shock, but then manifests it in a slightly different way by becoming pale. So Pandu is born pale. And finally, Vidura, who is the wise one, is born from a maidservant, all sired by Ved Vyas. Dhritarashtra, in turn, has 100 sons through Gandhari. Now, you would say, how is it possible for somebody to have 100 sons from one lady? Gandhari apparently produced a piece of flesh. Having produced this piece of flesh, she goes to Ved Vyas and says, what do I do with this? So Ved Vyas says, don't worry. I will deal with it. So he cuts it into 101 pieces. Each of the pieces yields a son, and the final piece, one daughter. So you have 100 boys and one girl. The oldest of whom is Duryodhan, who is one of the central characters in the Mahabharata. So we have this thing of Ved Vyas actually being the grandfather of Duryodhan. Duryodhan is killed on the 18th day of battle through stratagem. Move over to the ring. Wotan, in turn, also sires children through an earthly woman, a Volsung. And the two children are twins, Sigmund and Siglinde. They in turn fall in love with each other and finally produce the hero of the entire ring, four operas. And that hero is Siegfried, who again is done away with through treachery by being murdered in his back, which was the only way in which he could be killed. So the first thing that struck me was, you have this remarkable thing of Ved Vyas, compiler here, who's talking about all this, and whose grandson is actually murdered, Duryodhan, and the same for Wotan in these two. Going forward from these two, you also have what is almost like an extraterrestrial attack in both. You remember The War of the Worlds, a novel written by H.G. Wells. Now, this was dramatized and put forth in a radio broadcast in 1938 by a very young Orson Welles. And he did it so well that it seems that a number of Americans after the broadcast were genuinely apprehensive that Martians had actually invaded the Earth. Had, of course, those Americans had the slightest inkling about the Mahabharata and or the ring, they'd have been ready for this. Because in both, you have gods who come down here, cohabit with women, fight with human beings, and go back. Now, as an example, Bhishma himself, Bhishma Pitamma, who is regarded as one of the great heroes of the Mahabharata, is born from the river Ganga in the form of a goddess. So she comes down to earth as a goddess, and she comes down because there is a curse, and the curse is by a sage, Vasist. Vasist finds that his favorite cow, Prabhas, has been abducted by 8 Vasus, who are celestial beings. Each of them now have to be punished. So how are they punished? They are punished by being born on earth. Ganga is the vessel for their punishment. 7 of them are born for an instant and taken away in a very peculiar way. Because every time a child is born to Ganga with King Shantanu, she immediately does away with it. And the king gets shocked beyond belief. until finally the 8th child is the only child who survives, or whom she lets survive. And this 8th child is Prabhash, who was the person who actually stole the cow. So Prabhash becomes Devavrat, who becomes Bhishma. Bhishma, in fact, is an appellation given to him because he undertook a terrible vow and fulfilled it. The vow, incidentally, was that he promised his father that his father could marry Satyavati and produce children from her. And Satyavati insisted, and Satyavati's father insisted, that Bhishma should not rule, neither should he produce children. So he took this great vow and said, all right, I renounce the kingdom, I also renounce love in that sense, and therefore will not marry. And hence got the appellation Bhishma. So you have this so-called Martian attack by the Ganga herself, now in the form of a goddess, producing Bhishma. You have pretty much the same with Kunti Devi, who is the mother of Karna and 3 of the Pandavas. Now, Karna is her oldest child, and this brings to mind something like Moses in the bulrushes. Because she is given this great boon as a very young girl by a sage called Durvash. And Durvash says you can at any point of time call upon any of the gods and they will come to your aid. So as a very young girl, she tried it and she called upon the sun god Surya. Surya instantly came to her and was so enamored of her that he produced a child, and the child was Karna. She didn't know what to do with that child. So she put it into a basket, pretty much as Moses was put into a basket, and put into a river. And the child then wafted down the river, and there was a charioteer called Adirath and his wife Radhya, who then brought up Karna. Karna was not told about his royal lineage until much, much after. So you have Karna produced in this way. Similarly, Kunti again calls upon various gods to produce each of the first 3 Pandavas. Yudhishthir is produced through Dharma, who is the god of judgment. Bhim through Vayu. Arjun through Indra, who is the king of the gods. And she also calls upon the Ashwins, who are twins, so that Madri, the other lady who marries Pandu, can also produce celestial beings in the form of Nakul and Sahadev. Now you might ask, why was all this trouble taken and why couldn't Pandu produce his own children? Apparently he couldn't. Which is why you had to have this huge exercise. And you had all these gods and goddesses coming down, cohabiting with both Shantanu and Kunti Devi and producing these children. Likewise, in Wagner's Ring, you have Wotan again, who is the king of the gods, who now produces 2 sets of children. One are the Valkyries, the famous Valkyries. The ride of the Valkyries, most of you must be familiar with. And these Valkyries are 9 women who are produced by Wotan through Irda, Irda being the goddess of the earth. And these Valkyries are supposed to bring dead heroes to Valhalla, which is the hall built for the gods, so that they can protect this hall. So this is one set of people that Wotan produces. The other is the human set. The human set being cohabiting with a Volsung, a lady, bringing up twins. They used to call him Wolf Father, and the twins were Sigmund and Sieglinda. And Sigmund and Sieglind finally giving birth to Siegfried, who is the hero of the opera. So the other great parallel is this Martian parallel, if I may call it that you have gods coming down and producing children through humans. You also have gods fighting with humans. You have, for example, in the Mahabharata, Duryodhan fighting with Gandharvas, who I told you are celestial beings. You have in the ring Wotan himself taking part in a battle in which his own son Sigmund is fighting Hunding. And he takes the side of Hunding, not his own son, because his wife Fricka says that the two of them have violated the vow of marriage. Brother and sister can never get married. And therefore they must be destroyed. So he allows Hunding to destroy Sigmund. Like this, there are many examples in both the great master epics of gods coming down and fighting humans and vice versa. So this parallel again is a very, very real parallel, what I call the Martian parallel. If you move on, the other parallel now is how to achieve what you can achieve by stratagem. Now, in the Mahabharata, you have many, many instances of this. Most of them take place in the 18-day battle or the 18-day war between the Pandavas and the Kauravas. But one early instance is the instance of Jarasandha. Jarasandha is the king of Magadha. And Jarasandha's father had two wives, and he couldn't produce a child. So what was done was, a sage was called, Kashyap. And Kashyap gave 2 halves of a mango to both wives. They in turn produced half a child each. They said, what do we do with this, the 2 halves? The sage said, put them together. The moment they were put together, Jarasandha got formed. Jarasandha grew up, therefore, invincible, because at any point, the 2 halves would go off, and nobody knew which half to go after. And the 2 halves would then suddenly come back again. Now, Yudhishthir had to perform what was called a Rajasuya, which is, if you remember in my summary, I told you that when he got his kingdom for the first time, he has to now have some acknowledgement of overlordship, so to speak, from persons around him. That happened with everybody except this Jarasandha, who stood out and said, no, I will not accept you as an overlord. So, and it was arranged that Bhim, the second brother, who was the strongest and the biggest wrestler of the Lord, would have a wrestling bout with Jarasandha, after which either Jarasandha, if he lost, would accept overlordship or otherwise. They had this bout, and every time, as I told you, they had this bout, the 2 halves would suddenly get off each other, so that Bhim didn't know which half to get after. And they'd come together again and again, start wrestling with him, until he got tired. And finally, it is only Lord Krishna who looked at him and said, see to it that they never get together again, the 2 halves. So see that one half is pinned here and the other pinned here. And that is how Jarasandha got destroyed, by stratagem. When you come to the actual battle, 18-day battle, you have the Pandav army commander-in-chief who remains the same throughout, Drishtadyumna, who happens to be King Drupad's son, Draupadi's brother. But you have several commanders-in-chief of the Kaurava lot. The first of whom was Bhishma himself, the grandsire, the great uncle. Now, Bhishma in the first 10 days created such havoc and couldn't be destroyed, so that some kind of way had to be found in which to destroy him. The way was to put a person against the rules of conduct of war in those days, who he could not shoot at. And that person was Shikandin. Shikandin, as I pointed out in my summary, was a hermaphrodite. So he couldn't touch a hermaphrodite. And Shikandin had been born for this specific purpose, because Shikandin in his previous incarnation was none other than the eldest sister of Ambika and Ambalika, a lady called Amba. And she had come, along with the sisters, to get married to Bhishma. Bhishma had taken his vow, as you know, and said, I can't get married to anybody. So she had to be returned. The result was nobody would marry her. And because nobody would marry her, she was an outcast. So she decided that she would become something in her next life, after she died, to destroy Bhishma. And that person was Shikandi. So on the 10th day of battle, Shikandin was, as a stratagem, put in front of Arjun. And Arjun, because Bhishma wouldn't shoot at Shikhandin, had Bhishma all to himself and therefore laid him low. Of course, Bhishma also, as a result of the vow he took, had this one great gift given to him, or boon given to him, that he could choose the moment of his death. So he lies on a bed of arrows, sees the entire battle get over, and finally decides to depart after giving Yudhishthir a huge exercise on how to behave as a king. So we have the second instance now of stratagem, getting rid of the grandsire Bhishma. The third instance occurs on the 13th and 14th days of the battle. 13th day, Abhimanyu, who is a very valiant and great son of Arjun, who is one of the great Pandavas, is surrounded at the instance of a man called Jayadratha. Now, Jayadratha is none other than the brother-in-law of Duryodhana. So, because he is surrounded, and all his uncles and others are around him, somehow or the other, he is unfairly done away with. And because he is unfairly done away with, Arjun vows at the end of the 13th day that he will do away with Jayadratha the next day, 14th day. The 14th day comes, 14th day goes. Jayadratha is still alive at the end of the day. So what happens? And Arjun vows that he will either destroy himself or destroy Jayadratha. So Lord Krishna, after it has become sunset, makes the sun come up yet again, right at the end. And it's by this stratagem, finally, that Jayadratha is done away with. So we have Jayadratha now done away with on the 14th day. 15th day, Dronacharya, who is the teacher of both, and who has become on the 10th day the commander-in-chief after Bhishma is destroyed, of the Kaurav forces, now has to be destroyed because he is wreaking as much havoc as Bhishma did in the 5 days he was commander-in-chief. This again had to be done by naming an elephant Ashwatthama, because Ashwatthama was the name of Dronacharya's son. So what they did was, they killed the elephant and shouted at the tops of their voices, Ashwatthama is dead, realizing that Dronacharya would then give up everything. So Dronacharya hears this, says, what is happening? They say Ashwatthama is dead. So he calls upon Yudhishthir and says, you are known for truth. Please tell me, is Ashwatthama dead? Yudhishthir answers saying, Ashwatthama is dead, and mutters under his breath, Ashwatthama the elephant. At this, Drona sits down, gives up everything, and is finally done away with by the commander-in-chief, Dhristadyumna, of the Pandav forces. So, this is the fourth person who's gone by stratagem. After Drona, you then have the great Karna, who is one of the great heroes of the Mahabharata. He takes over now as commander-in-chief. Now, he in turn is a great warrior. He is actually the eldest of the Pandavas, but he fights on the side of the Kauravas because he is a Sutta. He is what is called a Sutta. That is, a person who is a quasi-Kshatriya, not exactly a Kshatriya, and certainly not of Kshatriya status, son of a charioteer. So Karna is a person who is looked down upon by Kshatriyas. And because Duryodhana suddenly makes him the king of Anga, and therefore like a Kshatriya, he is ever beholden to Duryodhana and now fights against his brothers on Duryodhana's side. The same thing happens on the other side, because Dhritarashtra also produced a son called Yuyutsu from a maidservant, not from Gandhari, who, seeing right, and who's also a Sutta because he's from a maidservant, quasi-Kshatriya, fights, however, on the side of the Pandavas. So we come back to Karna, and Karna had got two great boons. One from a god, from Indra, the chief of the gods, and one from a great sage called Parshuram. Now, those two boons were in the form of two deadly weapons. If either weapon were ever used against anybody, that person would surely be destroyed. Unfortunately for him, because there was a terrible fight with Ghatotkach, who was Bhim's Rakshas son, so to speak, through a Rakshas, the Indra weapon got used up to kill Ghatotkach. Parsuram's weapon alone remained, but it remained with a curse, because Parsuram discovered that he was not in fact a Brahmin but a Kshatriya, and he disguised this fact. So he told them, when you need my weapon the most, it will not avail you. So Karna, while fighting, suddenly finds his chariot stuck. At which point he jumps out, bends down, and tries to get the chariot wheel out. At this stage, Lord Krishna counsels Arjun, Lord Krishna being Arjun's charioteer, this is the correct stage at which to finish him. He's defenseless. And he tries to remember the weapon which was given to him, and unfortunately cannot, and is done away with by this strategy. And finally, on the 18th day of battle, Duryodhan himself is killed. He is again killed in an unfair way, because he and Bhim have a huge wrestling match, at the end of which the only way in which he can be destroyed is to be hit literally below the belt. So he gets hit below the belt when Krishna signals that it's his thighs that you have to get. And the poor man is killed by his breaking his thighs. Incidentally, this was also the result of a curse, but we come to that a little later. So we find stratagem to be a huge part in achieving victory for the good boys, so to speak, the Pandavas. Now, likewise, in Wagner's Ring, you also have stratagem in 2 or 3 different ways. The first way is when Loga, who is the very cunning god of fire, is called upon in order that he first and foremost is able to get payment other than the goddess of youth. Because if you remember in the summary, when Valhalla was built by these huge giants, Fasolt and Fafnir, the payment to them was the goddess of youth, Freya, so that they would remain young all their lives. The first stratagem was to try and get back this goddess of youth, because otherwise the gods would age. And that was done by brandishing the ring which has just been taken, and by telling the giants that, look, if you get this ring along with the gold, you people will be able to rule the world. The other stratagem is going down into Nibelheim, if you remember, where Alberic is, the dwarf who stole the gold and who fashioned the ring. Going down into Nibelheim, and in Nibelheim, getting hold of Alberic and the Tarnhelm. Now, you remember the Tarnhelm is a helmet which is magical and is forged by, or made to be forged by, his brother Mime. Anybody who wears that helmet can assume any shape or size he wants. So, you have this man now boasting about his riches, boasting about his ring, etc. And Loga, this cunning god of fire, tells him, oh, you say you can move, make yourself into some other shape. Let's see. So he puts on the Talhem and becomes a huge hissing snake. After he becomes that hissing snake, he tells him, this is all very well, something bigger than you. Let's see something smaller than you. So he becomes a toad. And the moment he becomes a toad, they grab him. And the moment he is grabbed, he gets imprisoned and the ring gets stolen. So that is the other great piece of stratagem. And finally, of course, the hero of all these operas, Siegfried, in Götterdammerung, is done away only by stratagem. What happens? When he sails down the Rhine and he comes to the Gibichungs, Gunther and his sister, he has left, if you remember, the ring to protect Brunhilde. Now he walks in, and the first thing that is offered to him by Hagen, who is the son of Alberic, the dwarf who stole the gold itself, is a portion which makes him forget who his true love is, and makes him fall in love with the first woman he sees, which is Gudrun. So that is what happens. And the result of that portion is that therefore he goes back, drags Brunhilde here, gets Brunhilde wants Brunhilde to marry his blood brother, if you remember Gunther, and ultimately is done away only by this stratagem, by then being speared in the back by Hagen. So, the other great parallel that you find between these two epics is this use of stratagem to somehow achieve your means, whether fair or foul. Having used this stratagem, the law of karma must kick in at some point. The law of karma kicks into both through the medium of the curse. And this is also very interesting. Throughout the ring, you have Alberic's curse working. If you remember, because Alberic was caught as this toad and then imprisoned and the ring taken from him, he curses every wearer of the ring. And he says, whoever will wear this ring will be blessed with murder and envy, two things. And murder is sure to follow, and envy from those who don't have the ring. And we see the ring's curse working immediately almost. Because as soon as Fasolt and Fafner, the two dragons, walk away with the gold and the ring, they start quarreling. And the result of the quarrel is Fafner kills Fasolt. So straight away the ring leads to one death, immediately in Rheingold itself, very first opera. The next thing that happens is, the ring then gets passed on, as you know, to Siegfried, who was the great hero of the opera. And before Siegfried, of course, you have Fafner, who is now guarding the gold, and guarding it as a dragon, because he has turned himself into a dragon using the tunnel and keeping the ring. Because he's got the ring, and because Siegfried now wants it, he in turn gets murdered. So, murder number 2, Siegfried kills him. Murder number 3 is Siegfried himself, who snatches the ring from Brunhilde, if you remember in the summary, under this potion, love potion of not knowing what exactly he's doing, and finally gets murdered. And the two others who get murdered also along with him, both of whom are desperately vying for the ring, are Gunther, who is killed by his half-brother Hagen, and Hagen himself, who finally drowns in the Rhine. So you have this curse working throughout the ring. How does the curse work in the Mahabharata? I've already told you about a couple of curses. Now, 4 other very major curses lead to either births, deaths, or other things, other consequences. You remember, Pandu was born, and born pale. Now, he went into the forest, and he shot 2 deer who were copulating. And the deer happened to be a sage with his wife. So the dying deer becomes a sage and then tells Pandu, look, you have done something very wrong. So Pandu tries to cite, as a good lawyer would, the rules of killing deer in forests by some sage called Agastya, but he misquotes it. So because of the misquote, he is then told, the next time you try and have sex with your wife, that's the end of you. And this curse then manifests itself in his trying to have sex with Madri, the other wife, and his dying as a result. So this is the Pandu curse. Then you have the Vidura curse. Now, who was Vidura, if you remember? He was the wise 3rd brother who was fathered by Ved Vyas and a maidservant. Vidura was here on earth because he was actually God Dharma or God Yama. And the god himself gets cursed. Now, how does he get cursed? Mandavya is a great sage. Mandavya apparently gets punished and has a stake, massive wooden stake put through him. And he exhorts the god of judgment, Yama, and tells him, listen, why have you punished me like this? So Yama answers saying, this was because as a child, you were very mean to the insect world. You used to destroy insects. So he said, I did that as a child. I was innocent. He said, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. The result is, therefore, I curse you. And the curse is that you will have to be born as a low-born human. Hence, Vidura. So that is curse number 2. Curse number 3 is the curse of how Duryodhan dies. If you remember, I told you, on the 18th day of battle, Duryodhan gets killed through the stratagem of hitting him on his thighs. This was the result of a curse. A sage called Maitreya comes to Duryodhan when he has unfairly thrown the Pandavas out and tells him that, look, this is wrong. Please bring them back. After all, they are your brothers, they are your cousins, etc. And Duryodhan sort of scornfully looks at him and looks down on his thighs. So he said, all right, you got that scornful look and you're looking at this part of your anatomy. It is this part of your anatomy which will finish you. So that is Duryodhan's curse. And the most formidable curse of all, which works itself out in a very peculiar way, is the curse of Gandhari. Don't forget, Gandhari had 100 sons, all of whom were butchered in the 18-day war. And since Duryodhan himself was butchered by stratagem, she cursed Lord Krishna, who was the charioteer of Arjun, and told him, 2 things will happen as a result of your actions on the battlefield. 1, your own people, the Yadavs, will destroy each other in a drunken brawl. And 2, you will be shot by a hunter. Now, this came to be in, again, a very peculiar way. Some rishis come and visit Dwarka, which is the place Krishna was born, and where his older brother was the ruler. They put up somebody who's a boy and dress him up as a girl and go to the rishis and say, what do you think this child will produce? So the rishis say, you're trying to make fun of us. All right. This boy/girl will produce a mace. So it's cursed to produce, and in fact, it produces a mace. Now, the moment he actually produces a mace, all these people get dumbfounded. So some wise gentleman then tells them that, look, we better destroy this, otherwise, obviously, it's the weapon of our destruction. So they actually destroy it completely and throw the mace, little pieces of the mace into the sea. However, those little pieces again waft back and come back. And each becomes a little plant on which there is a little mace. And finally, the curse of Gandhari comes true when the Yadavs have a drunken brawl among themselves. And each picks up this little mace and destroys the other. So that the Yadavs then destroy each other completely. And the second part of the curse comes true when Lord Krishna himself is lying down and his ankle is up. A hunter thinks that this is a deer, shoots him in the ankle, and he dies as a result. So you have the law of karma in both catching up through the medium of the curse. We now come to a stage where, when I went through the ring very carefully, all the 4 operas, I found there were exact parallels in some ways in each opera. Rheingold had 4, and each of the others had 1 each. In Rheingold, first thing that strikes you is the river Rhine itself. The riverine imagery of the Rhine is uppermost because it's the Rhine maidens who are swimming in the Rhine, protecting the gold. Likewise, in the Mahabharata, the river Ganga comes down in the form of a goddess, as I told you, and produces Bhishma. So the first direct parallel are the 2 great sacred rivers, so to speak. The next parallel is the giants, Fasolt and Fafnir, building Valhalla for the gods. Likewise, you had an Asur called Maya Asur, and Asur is a malevolent being, who, like the giants, built a huge palace for the Pandavas in Khandavprast forest, which was destroyed and made into Indraprasth so that they could rule there. The result of both these buildings, however, was that at the end of the operas, Valhalla gets destroyed, and through the Mahabharata, this particular palace gets abandoned because these people are now thrown into the forest. Third very interesting parallel. You remember I told you about Freya, the goddess of youth, and how youth would be taken away from the gods. You have an exact parallel in the Mahabharata as well, because you have a king called Yayati, who is the progenitor of the Pandavas and Kauravas. Now he marries Sukracharya, who's a great sage, his daughter, lady called Devyani. And he vows that he will marry no other. He breaks the vow. He marries another wife. So the daughter goes to her father and says, this is what has happened. So the sage curses him and says, all right, since you have done this, you will have premature old age come upon you. Exactly as Freya is taken away in the ring. And then he goes to all his 5 sons and says, listen, which one of you is ready to exchange his youth for this? 4 sons say no. The 5th, Puru, says, yes, I will. So Puru is then made the next king as a result. And it's through Puru that you have all these kings coming down into Shantanu, Pandavas, Kauravas, etc. The 4th exact parallel is the use of the Tarnhelm. Now you remember the Tarnhelm is that magic helmet. You remember how it was first used by Alberic, converting himself into a snake and then a toad. It is then used a second time by one of the great giants and making himself into a dragon so that he can sit over the goat and guard it. And it's used the 3rd time by Siegfried, who now converts himself into Gunther and then goes disguised as Gunther and drags Brunhilde. Now, like the Tarnhelm, you also have in the other series magical things taking place in the Mahabharata. First magical thing that happens is Indra, king of the gods, is attacked by Nahush, another god. He's attacked because he killed the demon of drought, Vritra. And Nahush attacking him, Indra gets frightened, goes into Lake Mansarovar and becomes as small as an atom and hides in a lotus. So you have this concept of somebody becoming extremely small and then somebody becoming extremely big, and that takes place in the form of Hanuman. Now Hanuman is the great god who spans both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata because he's immortal, though the epics are separated by hundreds of years. And one day when all the Pandavas are in the forest, Bhim is asked by his wife Draupadi, please go and get me some beautiful lotus flowers because the fragrance is fantastic. So he goes to get the lotus, and while he is on his way, he sees this monkey lying down. So he tells the monkey to get out of the way. The monkey says, I'm not getting out of the way. So he says, who do you think you are? Do you know who I am? I am Bhim. So he said, yes, we know you're Bhim. Try and move me. In fact, catch hold of my tail and try and move it. He caught hold on the monkey's tail. He was not able to move it. And Hanuman then reveals himself and says, look, we are both born of Vayu, who's the king god. We are brothers. Please give up your pride because otherwise you'll be finished. And then assumes his great form so that from the little monkey he becomes a huge celestial form. So you have this changing of forms, one through the medium of a Tarnhelm here and 2 gods, etc. in the other epic. So these are the 4 direct parallels that you find from the opera Rheingold. When you come to the next music drama, so to speak, and you come to Valkyrie, you come to Sigmund, who, as you know, has cohabited with Sieglinde to produce Siegfried. Now, he is told of his impending death. And he says, I will not budge from here. I don't mind dying, but I will not go unless Sieglinde comes with me. And since Sieglinde is not coming with me and I alone can protect her, I will not go. The direct parallel we find at the end of the Mahabharata of Yudhishthir and the dog. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. The Pandavas, as I told you, after a 36-year rule, all leave everything to Parikshit and then get into the Himalayas. And one by one, each one then dies. Yudhishthir alone is left last. And Yudhishthir has this dog accompanying him. So, just as he is about to enter the gates of heaven with Lord Indra sitting there, Lord Indra tells him, Yudhishthir, you are welcome, but the dog is not. So, he in turn says, if the dog is not, he's been my faithful companion, I will not enter. So that is test number 1 through which he is put. The dog is none other than his celestial father Dharma himself. The next test he is put through, however, is for him then to ask for his brothers and where they are. And before he can ask for his brothers and see where they are, he sees his arch enemy Duryodhan sitting in heaven. And he said, what's happening here? Duryodhan is in heaven. Where are my brothers? So he's taken further and he's taken down. And there is a putrid stink and he gets into hell. And he hears voices of Karna, brothers, etc. And he says, everything is topsy-turvy here. What is this? I see Duryodhan sitting in heaven and I see my brothers in hell. What is going on here? Finally, he is told that, look, every great warrior has done something wrong, so he has to spend a little time in hell. They've spent that time in hell. But you have passed all 3 tests successfully. So you and your brothers will now go straight to Svargalok, which is heaven. So we find this exact parallel also from opera number 2. We now come to Die Walküre. We come to Siegfried, the third opera. And in the third opera, you will find that when the wanderer in the form of Wotan, king of the gods, tries to pass Mime, the dwarf who is looked after Siegfried, Mime says, you cannot pass unless you answer 3 questions. So it's all right. What are the 3 questions? First, which race lives above the ground? Second, which race lives on the ground? And third, which race lives beneath the ground? All 3 were answered by Wotan correctly. Race above are the gods, the race here are the giants, and the race in Nibelheim are the dwarfs. Wotan then puts 3 questions to Mime. First question is, who are the people who are loved most by this god but who has been treated very harshly by them? Mime answers correctly the Volsungs, that is Sigmund and Sieglind. Second question, with what weapon are you going to finish the dragon who's sitting over the gold? He answers this also and says Notung, which is that famous sword which was shattered and then which is put back by Siegfried and used by Siegfried. Third question, however, Mime fails. And the third question is, who can forge this sword again now that it's shattered? He doesn't know, and he is told that this is Siegfried, and because you have failed, you will now die. The parallel that you find in the Mahabharata is when they are in the forest, the Pandavas are in the forest, and they come upon an enchanted pool. And there's a yaksha at the bottom of the pool. A yaksha, again, is a celestial being. So 4 of the brothers come to the pool. They're all very thirsty. And each is told by the yaksha, do not drink. For if you drink, you give up your life. You have to answer a couple of questions first. Each of them, however, drink and they're all dead. So Yudhishthir comes, he's the last. He's told the same thing. And then he's asked a number of questions, just like Mime and Wotan. And some of the questions lead to some fantastic answers, beautiful philosophical answers. One question is, who is a person or who alone can achieve happiness? So the answer is a person who has good conduct. Who is a true Brahmin? Next question. Is he a true Brahmin by birth, by good conduct, or by learning? Answer again is good conduct. Third question. what is the greatest wonder of the world? And this is a beautiful question. And the answer is fantastic. Answer is, greatest wonder of the world is that every one of you see people dying around you every day, and yet you think you are immortal. And why is that a great wonder of the world? Because you should know that you have only 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and you carry on cheating, robbing, etc. Another beautiful question is, if you abandon this, it will lead to happiness. Pride. Equally, if you abandon something, it will lead to joy. So, again, the answer is envy. And there are questions, there are some 15, 20 questions like this, which are philosophical gems. So again, you have this direct parallel of questions in the two. And then now we come to the last opera. And there you find the most direct and most Indian of all parallels. Absolutely remarkable. Brunhilde finally commits sati. Because Brunhilde jumps into her husband's funeral pyre along with her horse grain. And of course, in the Mahabharata, you have so many instances of sati. One of the most important ones is when Madri, second wife of Pandu, finds that Pandu dies because of that curse. Madri jumps into his funeral pyre. So these are also absolutely exact parallels between these two great works. We now come to two fantastic personages in both the epics. One I've touched upon, Vidura. He is the wise one. He is the one who is constantly exhorting the Kauravas to behave correctly, to behave justly, etc. And he saves the Pandavas from many situations, including almost certain death in a house of wax or a palace of wax that was put up, which they were to visit, and which would have been burned down and which would have killed them all. In fact, he gets a tunnel dug so that they can escape. Equally, in the ring, you have Irda, who is the goddess of the earth. She again is the stable, rational one, to whom Wotan goes for advice. And it is her advice that he has to follow in giving up the ring, because she says, please don't take this ring. Not only is it cursed, what you are going to do with it is absolutely wrong. You have cheated the giants and you have cheated everybody else with it. So please give it up. Now, let us end this interesting talk with who are the heroes, or who could you consider the heroes of both these great epics. In Wagner's 4 operas, there's no doubt whatsoever that Siegfried is the hero. The most beautiful music is composed for him in Götterdämmerung. His funeral music is absolutely out of this world. In the Mahabharata, you have 2 or 3 contenders. You have Bhishma himself, the grandsire, the great uncle. He has done what nobody else has done. He's given up kingship. He's given up being a father. But then his minus points are that unfortunately when Draupadi was dragged into the hall, he said nothing. When she was disrobed, he said nothing. And he could easily have said, look, I am the great uncle of both of you. Why should I join battle on one side to kill the others? So, difficult, therefore, to say Bhishma would be the hero. Equally, Arjun would probably be a putative hero, because he is the great personage of the Mahabharata, who's the great archer. In fact, he's called Savyasachi because he can shoot with both arms. Arjun again probably fails for the reason that ultimately he has destroyed his enemies by stratagem. Karna fits the bill probably better than these two, because he is the one person who is most giving. If you remember, Lord Indra comes down to him and asks for what he is born with, his earrings and his protective armor. He hands them over instantly, for which he gets that great boon, that weapon from Indra. Otherwise also, he is a very noble soul. And when his mother comes to him and declares that she is his mother, his real mother, and tries to get a promise from him, extract a promise from him, that look, you will not kill your brothers because you are fighting on the other side. He promises her, yes, you will continue to have 5 sons. It is either me or it is Arjun. I will not kill anybody else. So he is the epitome of nobility. But then his minus is that in one particular fight with some Gandharvas and Duryodhan, apparently he ran away and hid somewhere. I would, at the end, give a completely different take on who should be these heroes. According to me, in the Mahabharata, it is Vidura, and in the ring, it is Irda. Why? Because according to me, these are the councils of reason. These are the people who are constantly preaching non-violence, peace. And the moment we as humans now train our sights on these people as being heroes instead of persons who are either slain in battle or persons who have done battle, this world will become a much better place to live in. Thank you all very much. Call upon Gambata.
Thank you, Justice Nariman, for your enlightening words on a truly fascinating subject. May I now invite Mr. Darius Khambata, former Advocate General of Maharashtra, for the vote of thanks. Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm acutely conscious of the fact that a vote of thanks is always the most unpopular part of a program, especially coming as it does after this brilliant lecture. And therefore, thanks really be to Rohinton, as always, for sharing his wisdom and huge depth of knowledge with all of us. Rohinton is quintessentially the polymath, a brilliant lawyer and judge, yes, but his knowledge of religion, history, music, art is really equally fantastic, and I think has made him a much better judge. He embodies the great oral tradition, which we seem to have forgotten. The oral tradition of our old rishis, of Vedvyas himself, who narrated the Mahabharata to Lord Ganesh, of Homer, and he shares his wisdom through the oral tradition, and I think that's something of huge value to all of us today. So really, thanks be to Rohinton for this fantastic lecture and for all his lectures, each of which is a gem. I can't not thank Khushru Santok, of course, who carries on the fine tradition of Jamshed Bhabha. This is a wonderful institution that was set up and built by Jamshed Bhabha, both by his finance as well as by sheer personal effort and devotion. And Khushru has carried on that wonderful task in an admirable way. And all of us, Mumbaikars as well as the rest of India, are truly grateful to them for having given us this. I would end by saying that for me, the 3 takeaways of the epic, perhaps the greatest epic, the Mahabharata, and the Ring are these. The first, which is obvious in the Ring, that power corrupts. The ring gave power, but it carried with it the curse of Alberic, and it corrupted each of those who held that ring. So yes, I agree with Rohinton. Arda, who cautioned against Wotan holding on to the ring, was the wisest, because she knew that power corrupts. The lessons we learn from the Mahabharata are manifold, but straight away what comes to mind is, first of all, dharma, devotion or duty. So when the Pandavas went into the forest, they accepted their penance. When after 36 years, they gave up kingship, their self-sacrifice. That comes through the Mahabharata. Karma, of course, Rohinton has also told us about. And perhaps also the lesson, and again Rohinton brought this out beautifully, that revenge always brings destruction. The impetus to take revenge and vendetta is negative and can bring no good. These are the great lessons we learn from the great epic. But the third takeaway I would say is perhaps the most valuable today, which is that in a world which is increasingly intolerant and which looks for division and differences, it needs people like Rohinton to point out the parallels, the commonalities, because human character, human nature is transcendental through the ages. It traverses all differences of geography, culture, religion. Ultimately, human virtues and vices are the same. And if we can try to see more of that, as Rohinton says, the world will be a better place. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Rohinton. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khambhata. Ladies and gentlemen, do kindly join us for refreshments in the foyers of the Tata Theatre. Thank you for joining us this evening.